Okay, so what I suggested is we didn't do this the last time. We just go in the room real quick, introduce themselves. How long in real estate, what they did before and how many transactions. So
Okay.
Rolando, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rolando Ordinario. I'm the Director of Operations for the O team. No transaction myself. My husband, he closed 41 last year. And before this, I was a merchandising manager at Old Navy.
Oh, cool.
So I want to say something about Rolando and his husband. You haven't been here that long, right? Yeah, they came in from San Diego, started from scratch. 41 transactions last year in span of like 3 years. Yeah. So
Sweet.
congrats.
Well, we offered on one of your properties once, and I tell you, you talk about dropping a lot of signs. How many signs it was a Salt Lake property, I think, a condo.
21 signs.
You guys got that? 21 signs. You think it helps? 41 transactions. Okay, Chris.
Hey, Ron, I'm Chris Hanford. It's been just about a month for the O team.
Oh,
We did
okay.
Transactions for them, so working on licensing right now. This real estate is very new to me. Before this, I was a security manager and a police officer, so totally different.
Here?
realm. No, in Arizona.
Oh,
Arizona and California.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Storms.
Hey, everybody, I'm Storm. Pretty new to this. I've been doing it for 2 months. I'm still active duty Army.
Oh, thanks for your service.
So
Thank you.
that's why I did transition into this.
Cool. Emily?
Emily, I am new. I've been here about a month now, yeah. So no transactions yet. Prior to this, I'm still an author, 3 published works, and then I was medical, 15 years of pediatric sonography.
What kind of medical?
Pediatric sonography, so ultrasound.
Oh, stenography.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
it's
Okay.
like they were transplanted, baby transplants, stuff like that.
Cool.
So you can't help any of us if we just
Yeah, I know.
keel over right at the moment, right?
No, she'll take notes. She'll tell you what, she'll document what you saw,
Hi, I'm Jeff, and I was a realtor in California, and then I came here, so for about 8 years total, and done a couple of transactions here, so far, and before that, I was graphic design, because I studied that, so. Yeah, it's helped me in my, like, investing and you know, staging places up.
Oh, nice. So is it really different in California compared to Hawaii?
It's kind of similar in some ways, but there's more inventory here in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, you're Bay Area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hard to come by. Yeah, San Jose. So
Were you with KW there?
No, I was with Intero,
Okay.
which was a similar size brokerage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen?
Yes, Karen. Hi, my name is Karen Busicruz. I have been in real estate going into my 3rd year. I'm currently still working a full-time job as a architectural business manager. I just closed my 4th transaction
Oh, nice.
and
Congrats.
it's exciting, a lot of fun. Thanks.
Cool.
That's Frank Algieri. I got my license in 2014, I think, in San Diego. And worked there for like 4 years, kind of learning how it works and did some transactions. I got some listings, sold them, and then not too many, maybe 4. And then moved here, and then took a while to get my license here, and then I finally decided to do it. And I worked at Keller Williams in La Jolla, so I kind of like, okay, let's do Keller Williams.
Cool.
I already know what to do like that.
Cool. Well, welcome. How long have you been in Hawaii now?
Like 5 years.
Okay. Okay.
But I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it right away, so I got my license right when I got here, but I was sitting hanging nowhere, put it in the result.
What were you doing?
I have a couple cars on Turo and at Ubering, so.
Oh,
Wasn't sure if I wanted to like do the whole.
is that still going strong?
Yeah, it's still going strong, rented every day, it's not 100 a day or nothing, but it's still rented every day and it's easy.
Dang, that's pretty good. Cool. Okay, Hiroko, welcome back. She was in a previous, same class, but previous class.
She was sick last week.
Yeah, but she was in a previous.
She sent me a contract, so why weren't you in class yesterday?
I'm here also. It's 3 years, this kid I have a year and a half. Before I was in property management, but prior to that, I used to make spells people 7.
For where? For where?
11.
Speaker 7-Eleven.
Oh, for 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Uh,
In almost 2 years license, not a ton of transactions, but they range from 125 to 2.1.
nice.
Very odd. Yeah. I'm just kind of refreshing, get back into it. And excited, if you guys haven't, for you new people, if you haven't heard, I'm excited to get started with 72 souls. So that's my new thing.
70, what is that?
So
72
it's a
souls.
referral program.
Oh.
Program for listings, a new program that partnered with KW.
Cool.
And since I was in the beginning, was only doing my side, that's how I'm learning that side.
Excellent. Okay. And Isabella?
I'm Isabella Holstrom, real estate over 20 years. Haven't been very active the last few years, sort of tempering out every time renewal comes. I think, oh, maybe I should let it go. I get a call.
Yes, exactly. Then somebody calls you, right?
Keep my wits together by knowing what's going on, not falling behind on, forms and stuff like that.
Well, good.
So, Joanne and Hiroko was in a class. How long ago was that? A year? 2 years?
It was last year.
Last year. So you made a comment about now that you have more transactions, it's might be more helpful. So for those of you that don't have a lot of transactions, it might be a little tough at first because if you don't have transactions, you don't exactly know how it applies. But I think the reps are good. So we get into, as you know, a lot of detail, and I think it'll only help. So hopefully you'll gain some knowledge here, and then you can apply it. And then if you have a lot of experience, it just makes it a lot easier to follow along and apply it to your transactions. Okay, you want anything? You have anything, Tony? Before we start?
No. I think we left off at, I think the last paragraph that we left off at last week was, closing cost.
Closing, we finished that,
We
right?
finished it, yeah.
So F7.
So now we're up onto, conveyance tax.
Okay, so for those that have not been to this class before, what we do is we go around the room. So everybody participates, we encourage that. We're gonna just take turns reading word for word the contract. So every provision we'll read and then we'll cover it. Some in more detail, obviously, than others, but that's how we feel you can best absorb the information and help to apply it. So Rolando, why don't you start with F7? You have you need a contract?
Yeah, I can have it.
Well,
Yeah, I think they're in, private.
Oh, perfect. Anyone else need a contract? You guys are good. Yeah, page
Page 3.
F7.
Notice on conveyance tax. Pursuant to conveyance tax law, chapter 247, Hawaii revised statute. A higher conveyance tax must be paid if buyer is ineligible to file county real property tax homeowner exemption on the property. Check 1. Buyer declares that buyer is purchasing the property as buyer's principal residence. As other than buyer's principal residence, if the selection changes from buyer's principal residence to other than buyer's principal residence. Buyer shall provide written notification to seller and escrow no later than blank days or 15 days of that blank after acceptance date. Should buyer make such change, buyer shall be charged at closing an amount equal to the difference in the conveyance tax.
So there is a difference in conveyance tax, right? From a owner occupant versus an investor. So it's higher if you're an investor. And what it's saying is if you change it from owner occupant to investor, you're still obligated to pay the higher rate. It's not a huge amount, but
But enough when you start getting higher. The conveyance tax, it's a tax that the state charges and they fund a whole bunch of different programs with it. And it used to be a flat tax across the board, right? It was always like like 1/10 of 1%. And then it didn't matter what the sales price was. And then they had two different taxes, one for owner occupant, one for investors. So they were kind of dinging the investors. And then they came up with a tier system. So once you start going over certain price points, the tax gets higher and higher and higher. So it's really important if somebody's discloses that they're gonna be moving in as opposed to, being an investor.
okay, Chris, why don't you take F8?
Alright, assessments. Assessment is defined as any obligation, not including prorations and closing adjustments in paragraph 5, levied against the property by a homeowners association, governmental body, or any other entity with a legal right to assess. Assessments, if any, shall be charged as follows. A,
Okay, well, just stop there real quick. So assessments, typically you're gonna find them with condos. So condos, first of all, let's just cover that. So why would there be an assessment? You guys know? And what kind of assessments typically might you see if you're buying a condo? Sorry, go ahead.
Structural improvements.
And what kind of work needs to be done typically that you might see? That's a big one. Spalling,
Well, that's another one.
Yep.
Elevators,
roof, paint,
sprinklers.
sprinkler. So I think the ones, especially older condos, you'll see a lot of, or be aware of. If it's an older condo, look for sewer, the sewer line that needs to be replaced. Because it's gone past its useful life. Right? Or now with the Marco Polo fire a few years ago, and the city saying, hey, we need to protect the residents of these condos. They have all these requirements now. So either you got to put in a sprinkler system or go through some other process of maybe putting in a speaker system, but something needs to be done typically to a lot of these condos, the larger ones, to address that issue. So, when you look at a condo building, right, you have an association. So as an owner, you're gonna pay a fee. And so the association takes the money and they use that to maintain the building. So you guys own cars, I would imagine. Does everyone maintain their car at the same rate? Some guys change oil all the time, others don't. The guys who don't change the oil and let's say they want to keep their car a long time, they probably have to change the engine at some point because there's not enough lubrication to keep it running. So that's an example of a car. So, and if you do change your oil all the time, then probably less major issues you're going to face. Same thing with a building. You're going to have some buildings that are very well maintained. The association has their plan. They're pretty proactive. They do a lot of good maintenance. And you have some others that maybe not so much, right? So just be aware that there are assessments. If you're representing buyer, look carefully for those things. Either it'll be shown on the RO 105C, which is the disclosure statement, the lender's disclosure statement, or sometimes there are hints. When you look at condo docs or the meeting minutes, it'll kind of give you a hint that, we're bringing up as a new topic, right? Spalling, or when you want to consider resurfacing the driveway, whatever it is. So those kinds of things you need to kind of dig into and see whether or not do they have adequate reserves? Is it a potential where they're going to have an assessment, right? So just generally speaking, especially condos, assessments, be on the lookout for that, because that could mean a lot of money that you didn't anticipate as a buyer when buying condos. Anything to that?
Even like when you go and you're showing a condo, take a look at the elevators. Notice if they've been replaced. Take a look if it has sprinkler systems. Take a look at the outside, see if you see any spalling, which is when the rebar starts to rust and it causes the concrete to expand. those are all projects that are gonna have to be taken care of. And if it's a building that's not very well funded, you can kind of tell it when you get the financials. And you're gonna note that there's not enough money over a period of time to cover all the repairs or all the necessary projects that they have coming up. So it's gonna become an issue for the building, because there are some buildings that are notorious for being very underfunded and having all kinds of assessment throughout the years.
Yeah. You guys have any, Chad or Tony, you guys have any examples of an assessment for a single family home? I've never seen one before. So I don't even know what an example of that might be.
No.
Flood or CPR kind of situation, but not in a typical.
Not on a single, like a regular Kamaki house, right?
No.
I would imagine, some of the monster homes that are going up now. It could be that there are assessments by the city and the owner decides to sell because they don't want to deal with that, so that assessment will go with the
You mean
violation.
a violation, but I
Violation.
don't think that would be, but that wouldn't be an assessment though, right? A violation?
Yeah, that would be like. That would be an assessment, because there's like Hawaii Lower Ridge and some of the,
But that's managed though.
that's, yeah.
Okay, all right.
I will say, it is a balance, when you guys look at for buyers, a small or low monthly HOA. A lot of agents and buyers will go, oh, that's amazing.
Yep.
And not necessarily, because if there's pushback, improvements or repairs, that's gonna come back to bite someone later. And also the other balance too is looking at what the amount of reserves that they have.
Yep.
So if it's a total reserve of like, I mean, there's not a dollar amount, but it's relative to the number of units, it's relative to the monthly HOA. But if their reserves are low for the amount of units and the monthly payment that they have, they're gonna get in trouble. They're gonna need a loan if there's gonna be something that is coming up. And that loan's gonna be passed through to the buyer.
Yeah, you kind of touching on the situation where somebody may ask, what's the motivation of the association to keep their monthly maintenance fees low? Like, let's say that, we have, every year we have, what is that called? Inflation, right? I mean, things cost more every year. So if you see that, you're gonna look at maybe several condos, you see one that says, oh, this is only a 1% increase in maintenance fees, and this other one is a 3-4% increase, and this other one is 9% increase. Well, the one that's 1%, either they've collected so much money that they really don't need to collect much more, or it's the association that's saying, let's keep it low, maybe at the expense of the proper maintenance of the building. I would look for like 3 to 5%, right?
Yeah,
That would be-
about 3.
In line with what inflation is like, because everything goes up, water, power, labor, materials. And if it's high, like 9%, then obviously they're mismanaging or they're trying to catch up. So just be careful of those, because it doesn't take many years of 9 or 10% increases for it to double. Right, over a short amount of time, your maintenance fees.
And then normally like the buildings with low maintenance fees, you probably have like, older people sitting on the board that are on fixed incomes and they can't afford an increase. So they just keep like voting down any increases, and over time, the billing just becomes disrepair.
So hopefully this helps. It kind of tells you why, right? Why are these things the way they are? Just to give you some perspective.
The other thing too, just to throw in there, is there's some in town that include, AC or electric.
Yeah.
Or what have you, those, and some people go, oh, it's free, it's included, it's not free.
It's not
Because
free.
When people have that kind of mindset, everyone in the building leaves everything on.
Yeah.
And then what happens is it goes up even more the following year, and if it's a building like, Mount Terrace, which is in Hawaii Kai, they have a giant central AC unit, so when that thing goes down because of overuse, oh my goodness, that's a really large expense too, so there's a bit of a balance when you're looking at overall HOA, what's included in that. What the increase
Yeah,
is.
with electricity included, no one is incented to keep their electricity bill low. It's like, why would you? Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
A, any lump sum assessments levied against the property prior to the acceptance date shall be paid by either the seller or assumed by the buyer. Any.
So as a agent, right, if you're buying, you got to make sure you check the right box. Unless it's super competitive and it's a small assessment and you want the buyer to pay for it. Okay, go ahead.
B, any assessments levied against the property prior to the acceptance date, which are being paid in installments, shall be paid in full by seller or prorated by escrow as the date of closing, exceptions if any.
Okay, so that's where they're saying it's approved. And so that can get a little gray, right? So you might see in meeting minutes, hey, they intend on assessing.
No.
I'm
date.
sorry, this is installments, sorry. That's just, they're gonna prorate it or break it up, not a lump sum, sorry, keep going.
Okay, and C, if a new assessment is authorized against the property between the acceptance date and the scheduled closing date, seller shall make appropriate disclosure under paragraph I2, and such assessment shall be paid as buyer and seller shall agree. If buyer and seller cannot reach an agreement within 5 days of both parties being aware of the new assessment, unless buyer has agreed to pay or assume the assessment, either party may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph O.
Cool, so I2 is a new disclosure, right, or later discovered. Right, so it gives the buyer the option of canceling because it's new information to them. And this is where I was kind of talking earlier about it could get gray, because sometimes you'll see like in condo, in the meeting minutes, they'll start talking about it. And so you go, oh, that may be a new assessment. So as a buyer's agent, I just did one not too long ago where they had talked about it, they'd gathered quotes on it. But because it wasn't official yet, we were not able to negotiate a lower price with the seller. Seller was like, no, it should be covered as part of the maintenance fees. You know, we haven't been told officially that's an assessment, so we weren't able to do much with that. But just, you know, be on the lookout for that kind of stuff.
The easiest assessments to work with are the ones that are very specific. It has an amount and it has an end date. A lot of assessments now, they just run like forever and ever and ever. So you can never say like, okay, well, it's $100 for the next 40 years. Let me take 40 grand off or 50 grand off.
So when does an assessment become part of the maintenance fee and not be deemed an assessment anymore? Do you know? Is that it's up to the
I think it's like up to the association.
The lease association will not line item it as an assessment. They'll just increase it appropriately, which is then it's part of it.
Right.
If they have it broken up and, at least for the time being, they deem it as having some sort of end date, but to this point, what's the end date? Is it 2 years or 20 years?
Yeah.
And I think they do that just because it's not really part of the operating budget. I think the maintenance fees is based on, the operations of a building. So anything that occurs outside of that scope just becomes an assessment, or sometimes the associations will take out a loan, so they're financing it.
How would it not have an end date? Because isn't it all based on the loan, so it's predetermined?
Yeah, there was a lot of arguments going back and forth years ago, where they wouldn't do an assessment, but they would take out a loan. And so then when you get the fee breakdown, it says loan amount. And then you start trying to negotiate on behalf of your buyer or the seller, but nobody wants to budget on the loans because they're saying, oh, it's not an assessment, it's a loan. But if you take a look at the dictionary of what an assessment is, it's anything else, anything that's deemed paid against the property. So whether it's a loan, whether it's maintenance, like everything is assessment that's attached to it. You're just gonna have people argue over it. So if it's not something that can be paid off in a couple of years, or it doesn't have, a lot of times they don't have a specific amount that can be paid off. So like if it's an assessment to change something in the parking structure or to do an elevator, like that's an amount that gets assessed by ownership. Those you can kind of argue back and forth on. But if it's something that's like a long-term project, it's kind of hard to negotiate on that.
The other thing too is, for one of the properties that I own, I sit on the board for, so they're redoing roofs. And they don't know the exact amount, but at the time, money was cheap. It's not cheap anymore, but at the time, money was cheap. They went out and got like $1 million line. So they knew that they had a loan or access to $1 million. If it exceeds that, then that project is ongoing because they need to capture more money. Because they didn't have all the costs for all of it.
So they started assessing at that point, or only as it was used?
Just as a loan with the idea of we might need to add an assessment if the loan doesn't cover it because they're not sure about the amount yet, but they secured it when money was cheap.
Hmm.
That's what they did that specifically.
Proactively, yeah.
So once we have all the quotes, they can pay that back, they can solve that, not being necessary, there's options about.
Oh, okay. Emily, why don't you take F9 and F10?
Consents, buyer and seller may be required to obtain consent of lessors, homeowner, or condominium associations. Co-op boards, existing lenders, vendors, or other entities, buyer or seller shall cooperate and take all responsible action to obtain such consents. So we keep one?
Yeah.
F10, risk of loss. Risk of loss passes to buyer upon closing or buyer's possession of the property, whichever occurs due.
So I have a comment on that one that, oh, Chad, and then you can comment on. So when I'm working with a buyer, I read that last section, risk of loss. And what I do is, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, is I say, you know, we have a closing date. And let's say the closing date is a 30th. So we get into contract, 30th is the closing date, and then maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior to close, buyers are like, okay, I'm gonna buy this place, pass all my inspections and all that. I'm gonna start ordering all my appliances. I'm gonna change them out. And they order it, and then next available date is the 28th. So they call me and they say, can you call the seller and see if they would mind us delivering the appliances early to the property? So, I mean, that's what could happen. But what I try to do is when I'm going to the contract with them, I'm telling them that, you know, if you ever ask to put things into the property prior to close, that could be deemed as taking possession. And if you take possession, and let's say there's a fire, this is saying that you become responsible for that. That's how I read it. So Tony, what do you think?
The seller's responsible for the fire prior to closing or the
No,
buyer?
so there's a fire, right? But the buyer puts their personal items into the property prior to close. So I'm looking at it as there potentially could be an issue with the seller saying, well, you took possession
Yeah,
and there was a fire prior to close. After I put my personal items into the property.
yeah, I wouldn't do it.
So that's why I read that to my buyers and I say, you may be tempted to ask for that, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because if something bad were to happen, then you might be liable based on how that is read. Okay, so just things that you can consider talking about with your buyer client.
Could that be is something as detailed as them wanting to go in and do paint samples on the wall, like any physical change that happens to.
Don't
to
do
the
it.
home?
Yeah,
Don't do it.
yeah, because you know, you haven't closed it.
Yeah, it's not.
Something could happen. Yeah. I mean, besides a fire or anything, let's just say that you want to take a sample, you damage the house, you end up not closing, and they come back and they want to sue you now because you damaged the house. It wasn't your house. Now, if I'm seller, I'm saying no to everything. Right? Because I don't want any of that gray area stuff to happen. I just want, you keep your money, I'm keeping the house. As soon as I get the money, you get the house. Should be that simple, right?
Yeah, just to the risk of loss, I think. I always understood that you need to impress on your buyer that the moment it records, it is yours.
Yes.
Even if you haven't taken possession.
Yes.
If something happened to
Yes.
it, it is your loss. You don't go back and say, well, I never been in the house.
Yeah.
It never was my house.
No.
Now it burned down or
Yeah,
it's not,
right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
So the water, I mean, I had things happen where literally the day it closes, the pipe breaks.
That can happen. Yep.
It can happen.
Yep.
And, you know, it is then the person who bought the house, it's their Brianna, it's.
Yep. Yep, because it says closing or what?
Possession.
Possession. So either or, whichever is first, in my mind. And yes, things can happen prior to close, because that's why the final walkthrough is so important. We did a final walkthrough, we found wet floors that replace the flooring prior to close, right? And so if you don't do those kinds of things, your risk, right? As buyer, it's your risk.
Both of those I can't.
Murphy's Law.
I know, like for me, like if I'm closing on if I represent the seller and I'm closing on a property, I'll always put a different lockbox on. With a combination
Yeah.
of put a set of keys in there,
Yeah.
because the law is upon closing, the seller's supposed to give buyer a set of keys.
Yep.
So if something happens later in the day and they haven't had access because they haven't gotten the keys, it becomes the seller or the seller's agent or the buyer's agent's responsibility. So I always put an extra set of keys. I always call the buyer's agent, say, I want to come by and get my keys in the next couple of days or whatever. Let me know when it's convenient for the seller that they've taken the buyer when they've taken the keys off. And I'll just go knock on the door. I'm gonna remove my lockbox and be done with that.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're running all over the place because you can't get a hold of the agent to get him the keys, and you can't give it to the new buyer because it's not available. So just take all that off the table and I'm gonna put a lockbox on.
By the same token, right? I've had agents trying to be nice. I'm the buyer's agent. So they're saying, I'll give you the keys early. I'll give it to you the day before, since we're closing tomorrow. Meet me this afternoon, I'll give you the keys. Then there's no delay getting into the property. I'm gonna refuse that. Because if something happens and they say, and I go in and I find something and then they dispute it now, they say, well, you had the keys, maybe it was you. So I don't even want to go down that path. Right? Don't do it. Just follow the contract.
Or the buyer's agent gets the keys early and all of a sudden the buyer's already moved in. And it's like 2 days, and it's like 2 days before closing, because we've had that happen here. And the seller stops by and is like, why is the buyer moved in already?
Yeah, and as a seller's agent, that's your fault, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes buyers, they don't know, they got the keys, so they're probably saying, oh, I guess I can go in.
So you're saying as the seller's agent prior to the closing, or maybe a couple of days before the final, then you put a separate lockbox on there with the keys, call the buyer's agent, go look, closed already, or closing up line, come grab them, I put a lockbox over here for you.
Well, normally closing takes place like first thing in the morning, right? Like if it's a Monday morning, you'll get a call. Sometimes as early as 7:30, hey, the property's recorded. And we had an issue where we had an issue where one of the agents was an attorney on the other side. And we had gotten into a fight with them prior to. And instead of him being an agent, now he was an attorney. We ended up going in front of the board. But that was the one thing that I remember getting emails like the buyer deserves the keys at the time of recordation. And so now you're kind of scrambling at 7:30 to go get keys and deliver them to somebody. So I always leave keys in a separate lockbox. I'll take the electronic one off and I'll put a lockbox on there that if I never saw the lockbox again, I'm okay with it.
Or the other thing you can do is drop the keys off 8 o'clock, or whenever you get a call, it's recorded at the office of that agent. And have whoever takes the keys sign off
Yeah,
that they got the keys.
as a best practice, you do want to have it. Take the keys, Xerox the keys and put a accepted by. But what Tony's talking about is it just depends on your schedule, right? If you just put the lockbox out there, don't tell them the code until you get confirmation. And then you can have them maybe sign that paper after.
And the reason being, because it says it says that the seller is to give the buyer the keys. It doesn't say the seller's agent is supposed to give the keys to the buyer's agent. It says the seller gives the keys to the buyer. So you have to just kind of eliminate the two middle people, which are really the agents. Even though we're the ones transferring the keys. Because push comes to shove.
They look at the
they'll get sued and
contract.
they'll bring us in.
Okay, Storms, why don't you read F12? Yep.
Keys to the property. Seller at seller's sole cost and expense shall provide buyer at closing with all existing, but at least one set of functioning keys, control, entry, interior, mailbox, pool, security, parking area, and all garage door openers. Buyer shall pay all fees and or deposits which may be required for any of these items. Unless buyer and seller agree otherwise, all keys and controls and garage door openers shall be released to the buyer only after escrow has verbally notified the parties and or their brokerage firms that closing has occurred. It is strongly recommended that buyer rekey entry door locks, reprogram garage door openers upon change of ownership.
Okay, so the one thing to point out is that bold, that sentence in bold, buyer shall pay all fees and/or deposits which may be required for any of these items. Some buildings assess the owner a fee for a fob as an example, and they're entitled to that back if they return the fob. So be aware that sometimes the fobs are controlled by the association and not controlled by the owner. So the owner has to give it back to the association. So the new buyer has to then go, new owner has to go to the association, give them their deposit to get the fob. So just minor details, but just kind of be clear about those things, right? I had a experienced agent kind of complain to me that we didn't give him a fob and that it's required. So I told him, read the contract. And then all of a sudden he was very cooperative after that.
Can't argue when it's in black and white,
Yes,
right?
right. Oh, so one thing you can do is, under inclusions, what you can do is you can say as other or as an option, check the box and say 2 complete sets of keys if you wanted to. If you want to change that. Otherwise, you're only going to get 1 by contract. Yeah. Okay, Jazz, why don't you read, where are we next? G1?
Prelim title report.
Yeah, G1?
G1.
G1 and G2, how's that?
Okay, so G1 preliminary title report. Escrow is instructed to promptly order a preliminary title report on the property for delivery to seller, buyer, and their respective brokerage firms. The preliminary title report will provide a legal description of the property and a listing of the encumbrances on the property that will remain after closing. Maybe G2?
Yeah,
G2, a title. Title, seller warrants that seller is the owner of the property. Seller agrees to convey the property free and clear of all liens and encumbrances at closing with warranties vesting marketable title and buyer.
okay, can you stop there? You want to explain that in plain English?
Which part? The first sentence in A?
Yeah.
Does everybody know what a title report is? Okay, Hawaii's a little bit different when it comes to titles. We have 2 different recording systems. We have land court, which traces ownership all the way back to what's called the Great Mahele, to like when King Kamehameha owned everything. And then the other one is called regular system, which is kind of like how they do in the mainland. Like they can't guarantee who was that owner like 100 years ago, but in land court they can. And so basically, after you get into contract, and as the listing agent, if you do have a listing, you should have already ordered a copy of the prelim title report and stick it up on supplemental documents in MLS. And it basically states that these are the owners of record. Now, maybe one of the owners has passed away, has never gone to probate, because I'm dealing with one of those now. And that could be another 3 or 4 month process. But basically, the sellers that on the listing agreement are saying, I have clear title to the property. And then you're going to turn it over to the buyer with clear title, which means it's not going to be tax liens, no mortgages, nothing else that the buyer can't go and resell the property for at a later date. But there will be things like if you're in a condo, if you're in any kind of property that has an association, if there are easements, like all of those are recorded on the property and they run with the land. Leasehold property, for those of you not familiar, because it's not that popular anymore, but a lot of properties used to be leasehold at one time. And they had a lot of restrictions as to what you could and could not do to the property, and those run with the land in perpetuity. So you have to kind of be aware, and like I think we talked about it last time, where you'll get a title report and you'll see like these blue hyperlinks when you get it from downloaded. click the blue light hyperlinks and start printing everything, because that's where all the fine detail stuff that your buyer really needs to know. If it's a brand new development, not that big of a deal, but if you're dealing in neighborhoods that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years old, you want to know everything that runs with the land. Kailua used to have, Kailua deeds, certain subdivisions had it in there that there was, significant, that this property was once significant to Hawaiian ancestry. So at any time, you could have people come to your property and visit it just because they were Hawaiians, right? And so I think if you're buying a property, or your client's buying a property, you might want to know that. And that's the stuff that kind of runs with the land. Hawaii Kai, Wailaiki, those are all Bishop Estate, and they said that you couldn't have chickens, rabbits, can't park a car on the street. Those all still run with the land. So
Yeah,
alcohol, yeah,
no bars.
yeah, no bars.
No bars.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
I did want him to know, and I said you couldn't have this, and this, and not a gas station, but it was a residential area.
That's so, John, you know, as you're working on listings, you always want to make sure that whoever you're talking to, who's saying that they want to sell, has the authority to sell. Because sometimes they'll say they do and they really don't, or they're unaware of something, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
you don't know until you're going to record, and you go to Bureau of Conveyances and they kick the deed back. Because there's something in their records that say you can't record this because the deed is done incorrectly, or this hasn't been cleared yet.
So it's always,
Show on the freelance title, I mean, the title will get.
Yeah. it'll show. Yeah. So that's why you order whenever you want to do a listing, make sure you order a prelim. Make sure because it'll tell you who owns the property, right?
You
Um,
call the title company to order?
Yeah, you work through the title company, through the escrow company,
Okay.
who then will, your escrow officer. And so
Okay.
all these escrow officers want to build a relationship with you as an agent. And so they'll do things for you, like, oh, order a preliminary title report or do some marketing for you, right? Because they want you to bring business back to them. The other thing to think about is when it comes to things that restrict enjoyment of use of that property, there are some areas that, so you all know what an ADU is, right? Everybody, accessory dwelling unit, like a mother-in-law suite. So in Hawaii, what the government did, the city did, was say, hey, we want to encourage ADUs to help with our housing shortage. So they put together all these guidelines. So guidelines as simple as if it's 5,000 square feet or more, you can build up to 800 square feet, attached or detached from your dwelling, single family home, and you can have a separate kitchen. Because normally when you buy a single family home, right, it's one kitchen. So you can put in another kitchen, you can have a separate water meter, separate electrical meter, and you can rent that out. You can't sell it separately, but you can rent it out. So everyone's like, oh, perfect. I'm going to add to my house. Well, in the title report, certain areas, Mililani, Hawaii Kai, Kahala, it's restricted. It's not allowed. And you would know that if you look for it in the title report. Yeah. So the title report is really important, depending on what the buyer wants to do. Yeah.
So typically in those areas, there's no granny flat in the back of the house.
Not an ADU type. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you could partition off your house and maybe just rent out rooms. You see that a lot, but a separate kitchen, no.
Figure it out.
Yeah, not a separate kitchen. And not separate meters,
That's pretty nice.
right? Right. So just the importance of these title reports, right? So escrow, they're the neutral third party. They're going to collect documents, collect the money, draft the deed and all that kind of stuff. And typically escrow and title, same company, but it doesn't have to be. I can have one escrow company working with my client and a different title company providing title insurance. So title is there to make sure that they can deliver that property to the buyer free and clear of all liens. Right, so that they will have good ownership of that property. That's title's role. You gotta insure the property.
So normally you can go into MLS when you're getting a new listing. You can look up the owner of record. It's like 3 or 4 pages, comes on a PDF, and you just shoot it over to escrow and say, hey, I'm working on a new listing. Can I have a prelim title report, right?
Yep.
Because you may think you're getting a really good listing and you find out there's like 4 mortgages on there that are double what the value of the property is. So you kind of want to know all that stuff up front before you get excited about having that listing,
Or cousin Frank on the mainland
right?
is part owner and he doesn't want to sell.
Right.
That happens, that happens. Okay,
Okay, so, the section,
aye,
like.
Yeah.
Exceptions shall include but are not limited to easements, covenants, conditions, reservations, and restrictions now of record. And any documents relating to condominium, cooperative, PUD, subdivision, homeowners, community association, or cluster development.
yeah, so those are all exceptions, right? Running with the land, those are things that you have to accept. It's just part of what is being provided when you buy that property. So as an example, if you're buying a single family home and there's a wall that's encroaching in from your neighbor onto the property that you want to buy, and they have an encroachment agreement, you'll see that in there. You'll see the encroachment agreement, you'll probably see the survey, and you'll see what the agreement is, what that agreement looks like. And so when the buyer buys, they have to abide by that contract because it's independent of the owners. It runs with the land. Yeah. Okay.
Section 2, encumbrances to be released at closing shall include but are not limited to any liens, mortgages, agreements of sale, financing statements, judgments, child support, alimony, mechanics liens, notices of pendency of action, list pendants, subsidy agreements, equity sharing agreements, buyback provisions, repurchase rights, and or options to purchase shall be cleared by seller prior to closing, paid off, and either released or arranged for release by escrow.
Okay, you can stop there. So these encumbrances, what happens when part of what I think title does, right? It's title that does the checking
Mhm.
of the owner. So let's say, Bob and Sue Smith are selling. So escrow will search all instances of Bob and Sue Smith out there for any kind of liens, like child support, and as an example. We had a listing once where it was boyfriend, girlfriend who broke up, but boyfriend was still on the property. He was not very cooperative with girlfriend who was now married. So they were trying to sell. And so title is searching for all instances of that guy's name, forget his name. But being uncooperative, he didn't want to provide his social security number. So it almost held up closing because they found an instance of his name with child support that was not paid off. So they weren't going to allow the sale to happen unless they could clear his name from that. Yeah. So.
And sometimes it'll be 2 people with the same name.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
It
That's
may
what it
not be
was.
your client, and it'll say,
Yeah.
yeah, Bob Smith has liens that need to be satisfied. And if it's not the same Bob Smith, they'll have to do like an affidavit, like this is not me.
Yep. Yep.
Does everybody know what like equity sharing agreements, buyback provisions are, repurchase rights are? So a lot
Only
of
you.
a lot of these new buildings that a lot of these new buildings that are coming up in like along Kapiolani where they have like affordable and workhouse housing, and they have income limit restrictions. They normally have like a 10, 20, and I think even one of the newer ones just came up with 30 years.
Buyback.
So city, I just read one for one of the agents here because her client bought one. It was
HFDC.
HFDC, and if they don't want to buy it back, then there was another party that had the option to buy it back. And then if not, then it can go to market for sale. But the buyer had to meet the income restrictions in order to qualify.
Oh, the new
for it.
buyer.
The new buyer had to meet the income restrictions. And that there's a shared equity program. So they're only allowed to sell certain percentage above what they bought it for. And of the profit, the city and county or whoever decides that they want to repurchase it gets that piece of shared equity. And I know that you guys had a listing one time on a building on the corner of Young Street and Kalakaua.
Kolomua?
Yeah, where the guy passed away and the family couldn't rent it out either. So you have to be an owner occupant for either 10, 20, or 30 years until you sell it.
There's some that don't have the time, but all it's indefinite.
Yeah, it's indefinite.
Really?
Is that just to keep the price control?
Yes.
Yeah, because the whole intent is affordable housing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like some of the things in Westlock, that runs in perpetuity. Like you could have that house for 40 years and you got to share half of the proceeds, half of the net profit with city and county.
But then it's like only a certain percentage they can mark it up.
The original development was 50%
Of profit.
of profit. Because they were buying the house that was worth 300 to Kent, and I got the affordable house, it only cost me 150. And so they wanted 50% profit regardless of when you sold it.
But are they limiting what you would sell it for?
No, you
Oh,
can sell it to market, you sell it at market
Market
price.
value.
Right,
They just split the proceeds. You as the owner would then have to split the profit with the government. And the way they do that is they do like a appraisal.
yeah,
So it's not just the sales price, but also the appraisal comes into play somehow.
yeah,
But the ones you're talking about where the buyer has to still meet
the income limits,
then are they controlling the sales price there?
yes, yes.
They have to.
Yeah, I mean, there were some buildings when you did the numbers. Like the buyer within the seller within the first 5 years was gonna lose money.
Mhm.
After paying all the commission and all the fees, because they could only sell like maybe 4 or 5% more than what they bought it for. And it cost you like 6 or 7% in total, fees to go ahead and sell. It was a lose money situation.
You can also kind of on the MLS see which properties are fitting that low income share appreciation bucket. Because the price wouldn't be like $650, it would be $637, $258.
Yeah,
There's a target, huh?
yeah,
Yeah, because the county is doing the calculation or planning to get there. So when it says that, that's almost a dead giveaway that's share appreciation.
Wait, so in that case, is the government setting the sales price?
yeah.
Oh, so
So however,
Joanne, it can be the government setting the sales price,
The county's
not just market.
in that scenario, the one that in Westlock, and then there's also some in Kapolei, that's a split on equity. This one was 30%, that's 50%. In terms of the split of equity or proceeds that you get, whereas the affordable housing units, the person has to qualify, they have to be owner occupant, and the county sets the price. It's
Yeah.
always a whack price.
But the point is there's multiple programs, right? They're not all the same.
No, and they change. So you have to really know, like the ones that I was reading for the agent here, I was like, holy shit, like there's a lot of stuff I gotta calculate. And I just said, no, you got, because she wanted to know if her client could actually buy the city and county out. And I'm like, no, can't.
So how do you identify those properties in the MLS besides working numbers? You have to trust that the selling agent knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Started in, started out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just be aware that pretty much every single building that's on Kapiolani or now Keimoku have income restricted properties on there. So you just have to ask
Parts
them.
of it, right?
Yeah, parts of it,
yeah.
not all the units, but
Yeah.
parts of it. And you just have to ask them, hey, is this part of the income restrictions ones, right? And they're usually the ones that face the parking garage with no view.
Would
I'm
there
sorry.
be something in the deed if you get the agreement?
Like everything is in the deed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it'll show up in the hyperlinks.
Okay.
It'll just tell you income restrictions or restrictions, but you have to click the hyperlinks to get the other 60 pages of all, everything goes with it.
Okay. Karen, why don't you continue for us? I don't know where we left.
Buyer's review of preliminary title report. If buyer is not satisfied with the preliminary title report, buyer may elect within X amount of days of buyer's receipt of the preliminary title report to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 02.
Okay, so O2, you'll see in the contract, right? O1, O2, O3, those are the termination clauses. So O1 is default, O2 is within a specified time, and O3 is X amount of days after that provision ends.
Chemo Stone says that easy way to remember it is, oh shit.
Wait, try that again, what?
Oh shit.
Oh, for all of them. So those especially as a buyer, more so as a buyer, because this contract is heavily weighted towards the buyer, right? So as a buyer, you want to know how you can get out of the contract. As a seller, you want to know how the buyer can get out of the contract. But as this contract, the way it's written, there's so many ways that the buyer can get out of it and get all their money back. At which time all they're really risking is their time and whatever inspection fees they paid. Right. So this is one of them where it doesn't even say you have to show some kind of a issue with title. It just says if you're not satisfied, cancel. Yeah, so as a buyer's agent, understand how these things work. Yeah.
What is the usual number of days?
15, I don't know, 10, whatever, yeah, whatever. Rarely used, but you know, if it's long enough and it goes beyond your J1 as an example, and the buyer says, I want out, that's one way out. And you know, these provisions, if it doesn't say you have to provide evidence of something, don't, as a buyer's agent, don't tell them I'm canceling on G2B because title looks bad. Don't just say I'm per G2B O2, I'm canceling. That's it, right?
So as a listing agent, you want to have title report. You want to have all the supplements, you know, the hyperlinks, you want to have all that stuff printed out. You want to have the seller's real property disclosure statement so that when the buyer says, I accept your contract, you give them all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that if they're going to cancel, they're going to do it like right away. Like you don't want to wait until after they've done their home inspection, they've approved everything to find out that there's issues with the title or there's issues with the property disclosure statement.
Thank you for repeating
The title report. And then normally what I'll do, if it's a funky title report with easements, I'll go ahead and hit the hyperlink. I'll put it in a PDF format. So everybody knows up front what they're getting into when they buy it. And the seller's real property disclosure statement.
Yeah, there are things that you can control as a selling agent. I think that's what you're talking about as a selling agent, right? As a listing agent, things that you want to, as much as possible, you want to provide the buyer with everything up front, because in that way your timeframes will expire as quickly as possible. So title, although you don't have control over that because it's the title company that takes whatever amount of time to get that back to both buyer and seller. What you do have control over though is the seller's disclosure statement, which Tony mentioned. Right, seller's disclosure statement. What else? Survey if it's a single family home.
Yeah.
So when I first started in real estate 10 plus years ago, everyone did survey after opening escrow. So I talked to Dan about that and I said, Dan, why is that? He goes, well, because sellers don't want to have to pay for the survey up front because they haven't closed it. And I go, yeah, but that's BS because if there is an encroachment, it gives typically the buyer up to like 5 days prior to close to cancel on that if they don't get what they want. And what they want, maybe not what they want, maybe they just want to cancel. So there are some survey companies that might allow you to get the survey done in advance and then pay through escrow at closing. If not, I would convince your seller, just pay the $1,000 or whatever it is, get the survey done because it doesn't really expire, right? Land doesn't move that quickly. So survey would be another one. You know, whatever you can front load if possible.
And also, like, but to Ken's point, I see situations where there's an encroachment, and it's normally like you can get an encroachment agreement, but there's always that one neighbor
Yep.
that says, I want $10,000.
Yep.
And if that's the neighbor, you want to kind of know that before you get into contract, because
Yep.
that seller has to deal with that neighbor no matter what. Or you just say, hey, there's an encroachment and we're not giving an encroachment agreement.
Yep.
check with your lender and check with title to see if they're going to insure it.
It's always easier, right, when you're dealing with the other side, when they're offering. That they're offering based on everything that you know. And there's less surprises on the back end. And an encroachment agreement is a surprise, and typically it's on the back end. So, you know, any of those things, even if you can't get the encroachment agreement, it's better for the buyer to know upfront. And you as a listing agent to say, look, if you don't want it, don't offer on this property. Or if you don't want it, I can't get it. I mean, if you want it and I can't get it, cancel. But do it early, right? Don't do it right before closing, because that would kind of suck.
So if you do discover that in a survey before the listing.
Yep.
So let's say we pulled the title report, right? We're doing our due diligence.
Yep.
Pull the title report,
Yep.
then owner agrees to do the survey, then we find out that there's an encroachment.
Yep.
Then we go to the neighbor.
Yep.
The seller goes to the neighbor, works it out.
Yep.
How long does it take for that encroachment agreement to record, and do we have to pull title again, preliminary title?
It'll record, so what you'll do is you'll get all the, you'll ask for the encroachment agreements between, and then the owner and the neighbor have to agree to that, so they'll review it. And it's a pretty simple document, it's not very complicated. But what will happen is both parties will sign, and then it'll record when the sale takes place.
And then you would have a copy of that signature
Yeah.
that you could add to supplement your supplemental docs in case you want to be upfront.
Yeah, you want to have like the
Yeah.
encroachment
Okay.
agreement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's sometimes there were the encroachments that they're like within the de minimis,
Yeah.
so you don't need an agreement at all.
Or Dan's story was, he had one where it was like over de minimis. And so they had the surveyor come back and just verify. And you know, you have those rock walls where the rocks kind of stick out a little bit. Just chopped it. Or I had one where, so surveyors will not dig. Okay, they will not dig. So let's say this line represents like a rolled piece of concrete that is primarily on this property, but goes over this line. This is the property line onto this side. If it's covered with dirt, the surveyor will not do this. Find out where that concrete ends. So you can kind of be a little tricky and just cover things up. No, because they won't dig. And what they also won't do,
Didn't you just do that? You told me about it.
surveyors will not tell you who owns that
Yeah.
piece of concrete.
Yeah.
All they do is tell you that it's there and where it is. Right, so you will never on a survey see that they'll say that it's on lot 1 and encroaches into lot 2, but they will not say lot 1 owns that piece of concrete. Because they don't know. Or if it's a wall, right? They don't know who owns the wall. The wall may be all the way over here, so they'll say rock wall on subject property 1, encroaching 0.7 feet into lot 2. But they're not gonna say, oh, lot 1 owns this wall and it's encroaching into lot 2. Right, so that's part of, as a listing agent, you need to go and ask, who owns the walls? Because that wall could be owned by the neighbor. The neighbor may have paid for that wall. Right, but they built it on the neighbor's property.
And that's why the encroachment agreement is important, because basically with the encroachment agreement, or sometimes licensing agreement, says that the wall can stay where it's at until it falls down, and then whoever owns the wall has to build it on their property. So if nobody can determine who owns the wall, it becomes a problem later on, and
Yeah.
that problem passes on to your buyer.
Yes,
When you have that problem with city and counties, when your wall is encroaching in the sidewalk,
forget about it.
you have to write a letter
To
to
the,
the city and county.
You're not gonna get it.
Oh, we got.
You got it?
There
yeah, it takes a
yeah.
while.
I wouldn't even go there.
Yeah.
No, just say they're not gonna
No,
respond.
the buyer said he will not go through.
How long did it
That
take?
Isn't resolved,
How long did it take?
not long.
How long is not long?
Oh, I don't know, maybe a week was.
Really?
it was really
And
short.
so
It
they,
was What we did, write a letter, took pictures, sent
Okay.
everything to city and county, and they're
But what did the city do? Did they sign an encroachment agreement?
No.
No, they'll do a variance.
Oh, variance.
And then if you're bordering a school, that's state, because I had one in Lani Kai.
Okay, variance then. Okay, not an encroachment, agreement, a variance.
Variance.
Yeah, but the
Okay.
buyer was, it's encroaching into, had a, survey into city and county and give them school. And
Yeah.
if we didn't get something.
And if you're on the ocean, then you have to get a licensing agreement from the state and they charge you a yearly rent.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
question before you move on. If it's between neighbors and not sitting down here, is it a document that we do? Or
The
is it
attorney,
something that
the attorneys do it, yeah.
And normally seller pays, normally, because seller wants it, right? Neighbor typically is like, well, it's been there for 40 years. I don't care.
Right. Okay.
And then some escrow companies will, either they will send a notary or the escrow officer, him or herself might be a notary. And so if you think it's a tricky one, have them go with you. So that when they sign, the notarize right then and there. Make it easy for the neighbor.
You know,
So-
and then just tell the neighbor too, is like, hey, it's for your
Yeah.
benefit, you know, should you decide to sell at some
Yeah.
point in time, you don't have the agreement, you're gonna be in the same place that we are right now. Right?
Yeah, first question I always ask sellers is, how friendly are you with your neighbors? Because that kind of helps determine whether or not you'll be successful, but absolutely. What Tony's talking about is correct, because when you sell, right, it's the fear of the unknown as a buyer. So when they sell, even if it's an encroachment, what does it do? It identifies ownership of the wall. No question mark. It identifies who's to maintain the wall. No question mark. And it identifies what happens if it degrades to the point where it cannot be maintained anymore. So it's just, now you know what you're dealing with. It just makes it much easier to deal with going forward. Yeah. Can we take a potty break?
Yeah.
Or you can continue.
No, I'll wait for you to go potty.
Thank you.
I wanna go back to, I think you had to do with, like, stuff that's in the deed. If you're selling a really small, like 3 units, 4 unit CPR, you know what does everybody know what a CPR is? So you have 4 houses on a lot and you can't subdivide them, so they create like a condo. And everybody was neighbors at one time, so they may have these handshake deals. Or I'll let you buy this house, but you have to give me access if I want to go to the stream and go fishing, right? Because we had a situation where a buyer was buying a house in Palolo. And he had the property on the stream. And there was an agreement with the front house, giving the guy the right to go through their yard and use their steps to use it for fishing. And I said, it's with the deed. It's in the deed. It runs with the land. I said, does your buyer really want his neighbor who he doesn't know to be accessing through his yard and sitting, on his stairs while he fishes all day long? So they ended up canceling. That's why it's really, really important to use the hyperlinks, because there's information in there that won't show up in the title report itself.
And that was your listing?
No, that was an agent within the company.
Okay.
Yeah. Because if you and I have been friends for 20 years, I don't care if you're in my backyard anyway, right?
Right.
But if I go to sell it or you go to sell it, you may not want that person in your backyard because you may not even like them.
Right, might have class personality.
Right. And then then it's in writing that you have to grant them access.
Got it.
The other place where you can find description. Homeowner associations, especially if they are in an area where you have single family homes. A lot of agents say, well, can be like that or. And I live in a homeowners association, we have restrictions, we cannot rent out any part of our house to an unrelated party, not even one person. So you cannot build any ADU units, no matter how big your lot is.
So there are all kinds of things in there that you think, well, it's just a homeowners association and a pool and, they're single family homes and, but there are things in there, people buy it, they think they can subdivide their house, have a rental in there.
No, because then you get neighbors that are kind of watching all, they got nothing else to do but to watch what's going on in the neighborhood. Yeah.
HBR, there's classes on how to read preliminary title report.
So we normally have classes here too, right? We have somebody, a title rep come in for first white title or fidelity or title guarantee.
Okay.
It's good to read it for your own knowledge, but don't give legal advice. Kind of like when you get condo docs, I read everything and I'll say, these are the things that I think are red flags. Have your attorney or have your CPA or whoever the document really, applies to, with their knowledge and expertise. But I don't really give, but if it says, that these are the things that you can't do, I can say, hey, you can't do this stuff, and you may not care, but I'm gonna bring it to your attention anyway.
R6. R6 is really important for you guys to read and understand in the contract.
Is that even like, oh, R6? I thought you meant like zoning R6.
No, R6 on the contract. You guys can read that later. Shall we start up again? Who are we missing? Just Joanne.
Joanne.
Yeah, let's start. Where do we leave off? I'm sorry?
See, title defense.
Oh, was that done already? No. Yeah, you want to read that, Karen?
Sure. Title defects. If a buyer elects not to terminate under paragraph G2B, and if the preliminary title report or any other report or any updates to such reports reveal that title cannot be delivered by seller in accordance with paragraph G2A, then seller shall make appropriate disclosures under paragraph I2. And seller shall use reasonable efforts to cure any title defects within X amount of days following receipt of any reported title defects. Seller is, sorry, that wasn't a period, reported title defects. Seller is unable to cure such title defects. Buyer may elect to purchase the property with such title defects, and seller shall not be liable for such title defects. If buyer elects to not accept the property with such title defects, either buyer or seller may elect to terminate the purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 3.
Okay. So if I'm a buyer and I have a loan and there's a title defect, you think it's possible or likely that I'll be able to buy?
No.
Probably not, yeah. So when it says you can still buy, that typically is referring to a cash buyer. I've seen that before where there's a little bit of a defect and the price was cheap enough that the buyer said, well, I'm cash, I'm gonna buy it, I'll solve it later. Right. Okay, Oksana, why don't you take G3?
Investment and tenancy. The buyer is the persons or entities which have signed the purchase contract on page 14. Buyer shall provide escrow with the buyer's full legal names and marital status for individuals, trust documents, name, and type of business entity, etc. And the tenants of the buyer shall take title within days, 15 days of that night after the acceptance.
So normally escrow is reaching out to the buyers and asking for all this information. Right, so do you get involved in that?
No.
Yeah, typically it's escrow taking care of that, right? Now, if they're not responsive, then escrow may call you and say, hey, your buyer's not giving me what I need.
Yeah, I mean, I normally just tell the buyers what their options are up front, as far as like how to take title, but I don't really get involved after I tell them what their options are. Does everybody know the different tendencies?
Yeah, I only prefer to escrow.
Anybody have questions on tenancy? Okay, Who wants to read H1? Okay,
H1, no contingencies on obtaining cash funds. Buyer represents that there are no contingencies on buyer obtaining the necessary cash, including all deposits, down payment, and closings, including loans, costs to buyer, property, total cash fund, failure to buyer to make the balance of the down payment as required by the purchase contract shall constitute the default.
okay, verification of cash funds.
Verification of cash fund, buyer shall provide the items indicated below as evidence that the buyer has total cash funds within blank amount of days after the acceptance date. If the buyer fails to provide such evidence within the specified time period, sellers may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 303. If seller is not satisfied with such evidence of cash funds, seller may elect within X amount of days of the receipt of such evidence to terminate the purchase contract pursuant of paragraph 303.
So normally, and I don't know if Chad had touched this in his class last week, but normally verification of cash funds, you just have the lender do it. And say they are qualified, they are approved for this loan, and I have verified that they have sufficient funds to close the loan. Normally attach it with the offer. I usually put like 1 day. Because it's already with the offer, so if the seller is going to disapprove or anything, or if they already have it, so they can't say, I didn't get it, therefore I'm going to cancel.
Mhm.
On the next sentence, where it says, if seller is not satisfied with such evidence, I put NA. Because when the market was heated and you give a seller 5 days and you give them a bank statement, and for some reason they get another higher offer in, they're going to say, oh, I don't like the guy's bank statement. Now, the guy could have plenty of money in there, but it doesn't say that they have to give a reason as to why they're disapproving it or they're not satisfied with it. It's just that they give them the option. So if your buyer is well qualified and they have the cash funds, just say NA. I'm giving you verification that they are approved, that they do have cash funds, and you will accept this. You don't have the right to cancel.
You're taking away one of the few ways that the seller can cancel on buyer.
Right. Yeah, because it says verification of cash funds. Valid buyer shall provide items indicated below as evidence that the buyer has total cash funds within. So I just say 1 day after acceptance day. And if I give that to them on the day of acceptance, there's nothing they can really do. Like, I don't have to worry about that timeline.
You fulfilled it.
Yes, I fulfilled it.
Do you have the lender give verification? You don't have a bank statement? You don't give to the seller?
Because a good lender will already check the bank statements. And you don't want to be and the only time that you will give a bank statement is if you're dealing with, say, a cash purchase of maybe 300,000. But if you're dealing with like really high-end properties, they have a private banker that'll write a letter and say that there is more than sufficient funds to cover this purchase of X amount of dollars.
So it's the same as proof of funds? I don't know if you guys have that.
Yeah,
Yep.
same thing, proof of funds.
Oh, so they don't require you to give a statement from their bank?
It says whatever you check off.
Whatever you check off. So if you just take that off, if you do NA for the next line,
Yeah.
then you can just, it doesn't apply. We gave it to you.
Okay, because in California, you're always usually given the proof of funds and the proof of letter. Well, obviously, if it's cash, no proof approval, but
Yeah.
the lender or the banker, he said it's giving their.
Normally, yeah, normally the high-end, like high-end properties, the banker is verifying. And the guy will always say, hey, call me, call me if there are any questions. You can call, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, I got a letter that you state that these guys have, $5 million. Now, as a seller, in the sales agent, you can always counter that out. But as the buyer, I'm just saying, like, just eliminate all that altogether.
So as a when I'm doing listings, right, I'm telling sellers. There are three, and I don't know if I mentioned this the last time, but. There's three legs to the offer that comes in, that has to be strong. Buyer. Buyer's agent and lender, if there's a loan involved. If there's a weakness in any of those three, then we may have a problem in selecting that offer. So with the lender, right, and you're working with the buyer, involve the lender early. And if they have a lender already in mind, then I would try to interview them. You know, do they understand Hawaii business? Are they local? Are they mainland? Where are they from? How do they operate? That way, whenever you submit an offer, so you're telling them, right? Oh, okay, so for Joe Smith, when I'm ready to offer, how much time do you need once I determine the offer price for you to send me a pre-approval and proof of cash funds? And the good lenders are always available, so they might get back to you in a few hours, right? Maximum half a day or whatever it is. So it's a team. So I would line up your lender with your buyer. Make sure that you have that line of communication already open so that when you offer, it's just a quick email, text, or phone call to get that information. So that as you're writing your offer up, they're already sending you that information. You're just turning around and submitting to seller.
I mean, you can go ahead and give him a bank statement.
Yeah, so.
You know, if
it's
it makes you-
always, like usually what the seller's agent will require in the Bay Area, like they want
Yeah.
to see the money in the bank.
It used to be like that here, you know,
Okay,
long time ago. It was
Yeah.
always, you get the bank statement and line
Yeah.
out the account number and all that kind of stuff.
And you can,
That's how it used to be.
yeah, and what I'm saying is that you can go ahead and do that because there are a couple of options at the bottom, but you don't want to let them reject it
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And they don't have to give you a reason. If it's a
Yeah.
$500,000 purchase, they have $1 million in the bank and they said, well, we don't like your financial statement. We don't like your bank record. Like that's stupid, you know?
We work with several lenders on our team. We have several lenders that we work with, and it just depends, right? And it's always good to offer a new client options. One of the lenders, and I'm sure all of them will do the same thing, but one, they coin it, they said they do a strong buyer call. So proactively, they will call the seller's agent and say, hey, you know, this offer that came in from Kent on your property representing Joe Smith. Just let me tell you, I've already met with him, I've collected this, I've verified this, well qualified to buy. So that helps.
The lender calls the.
Yeah.
seller's agent.
Yeah.
Lender calls seller's agent, yeah, proactively,
Yeah.
proactive.
Because a good lend, because like I did a transaction where the lender had called and it was competing. And the lender had called the seller's agent. And
It helps.
that was the difference between her getting the property and not getting the property.
It is a people
Yeah.
business, right? So the more confidence you have that the offer, you know, you're getting good vibes from the agent, you're getting good vibes from the lender. One less thing to worry about as a listing agent, right?
Yeah.
Who you calling on, Ken?
Oh, did
Maybe you
did
should do like a
finish?
bingo thing.
Did
I
you
don't have finished yet.
Yeah, you
finish?
finished.
Okay, Hiroko, why don't you go to H2?
H2, contingency on obtaining cash funds. In reference to the balance of down payment or balance of purchase price, if all cash buyer's obligation to purchase a property is contingent upon the following: check all that apply. Sale of buyer's property located at obtaining gift funds, withdrawal from investment, withdrawal from home equity line of credit, other.
Yeah, hold off on that. So, you know, there's a lot going on there when you have a contingency. It could be, I gotta sell to buy. I have to pull from my IRA, I have to pull from a HELOC. And so, you know, let's take the first one. Let's say that you gotta sell, right? So you have a listing, and the listing, the owner says, I want to buy something. So they come to you saying, I want to buy this property in this area. And then you ask them, well, in order to buy, you have to sell. And they say, yes, I have to sell. So then you go, okay, the strongest offer that we can provide is if you've already sold it and we have the cash. Second would be is, if we're already listed and we're in escrow, we have a closing date. Third would be we're on the market. And fourth would be, oh yeah, as soon as we find something, we'll list it, right? You don't want to be in that position. The last one, obviously. So if you are offering on a property which is contingent on the closing of another property, provide all that information to the seller side. Whatever the sellers or the buyers allowing you to provide on their listing to provide confidence to that agent. I've even had where the agent, so we are selling one here, they're doing an exchange on the mainland, so they're buying something in California, and the agent in California representing our client here knew the listing agent there, and so encouraged the listing agent there to call me because we hadn't closed yet. And California, Bay Area, everything's cash above asking. And we had a contingency, and they selected us over the all cash because of the confidence that we could provide that this thing was lined up to close, no issues. So people business, right? Just, you got to provide the evidence.
So I did like a whole report because I got my place, one of mine, and it was with the contingency of selling a place in California. So I did look at the, like story, like pictures, and then, like kind of statistics of how quickly they sell, and that there would be no problem, and confident, and sure enough, it sold pretty much right away. And I mean, they accepted that
Yeah.
contingent before I even put it up for sale. So it's all like selling, everything is really.
Yeah. It's fear of the unknown. You want to make sure that there's no unknowns, right? They know everything
Letters.
that's going on. Yeah.
Love letters.
Love letters.
Which are actually against the law.
Illegal.
Illegal.
Especially in California.
That's nationwide.
Like a letter in general?
Well, it depends on what they say, right? You cannot say family, cannot, all the protected classes. You can't talk about that.
Discrimination.
Be great for my family. Oh, familial status.
Oh yeah, I went to Kamehameha school. Oh, Hawaiian. That's discriminating.
Everybody does it, but it's not legal.
Yeah.
But everybody does it.
Going back to H2, if you are representing the buyer and he's selling their property, so it's contingent on the sale of the buyer's property, add the contingency sale addendum in there, because it'll identify as to whether
Where
or
you
not
are, yeah.
their property is already in escrow,
Yep.
or if it's on the market, or if it's not on the market. And and representing the seller, you're gonna want at least the guy to be in escrow and close to closing, not like, oh, we're just gonna accept the contract yesterday.
Another one is withdrawal of money from an IRA, especially when it comes to closing, right? Depositing the money. As a listing agent, I suffered through that when the buyer's agent kept saying, oh yeah, all it has to do is request it. So I said, well, what's that process like? And then he dug further into it, only to find out it's not a 5-day process. It's like a 2-week process. So as a buyer's agent, understand it when they say, oh, use your IRA. The first question I ask is, what do you need to do in order to get that money out, and what's the timing like? And then same thing for the seller's agent. If it's based on something that they have to sell, how easy is it for them to sell it? What's that process like? Yeah, because sometimes agents, as like a buyer's agent, maybe didn't think of asking. They're not, smart enough to ask or experienced enough to ask. And since you're asking, now it gives them an easy way to ask their client. Right.
And I would say, like, withdrawal from investment, I would put like a really tight timeline on that. I mean, look at COVID when the market drops about a couple of thousand points every other day, right? So now a buyer's like, okay, I'm confident and I just lost half of my investment. Can I really afford to buy this house?
Okay, Hiroko, you can continue.
A buyer shall provide evidence that is satisfactory to seller or buyer's ability to obtain balance of down payment or balance of purchase price or cash within X amount of days after the acceptance date.
E, if buyer fails to provide seller with such satisfactory evidence within the specified time period in paragraph H2A, seller may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 03.
Okay.
C, if seller is satisfied with evidence timely provided by buyer in paragraph H2A, but buyer is unable to ultimately deposit the balance of down payment or balance of purchase price or cash into escrow in accordance with paragraph C2, then
Go ahead.
one
Yeah.
buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 02, or if buyer elects not to terminate this purchase contract under paragraph H2C. Then seller may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 03.
Okay, so it's just saying, well, you see that again, right? Satisfactory evidence that Tony pointed out, it's very vague. So whatever you can do to tighten that up. And know that as a seller, these are your ways out from a buyer, right? A lot of it has to do with financing and cash and deposits, right? Money. Buyer can't do certain things, and it gives the right to the seller to cancel on the buyer. So as a buyer's agent, just make sure everything's all lined up in terms of proof of funds, deposits, all that kind of stuff. They don't want to be late in providing any of that information.
And, going back to H2C, seller is satisfied with evidence. But buyers unable to ultimately deposit the balance of down payment in accordance with C2. The only thing that has time deadlines in C2 is the initial deposit and the additional deposit. The additional cash funds and remaining cash funds, they only come into play like right before closing. So if you're like 3 days before closing, the guy goes, my account is down by 40%, like I can't withdraw the money. Like there's really no recourse for the seller at that point, right? So what you kind of want to do is to maybe put something in special terms, especially if they're withdrawal from an investment, that the funds have been deposited into a normal bank account and fully accessible, that he's already made the withdrawal.
What kind of timing would you put on that?
I would say within 2 weeks.
Of opening escrow,
Within 2 weeks of opening or closing escrow.
not closing, opening. Maybe closing
Well, if you
escrow.
got a 28-day, it's 2 weeks, right? Get it? It's in the middle. Doesn't matter.
Gotcha.
Prior
to close.
I had to think about that one really quick. So yeah.
Okay.
Or I would say within 2 weeks after, or tied into the J1. Like I would try and tie is like if you're representing the buyer or even in a seller in this situation, I would try and tie everything to J1 inspection, because you want to know that when the inspection period is over, like everything is done. Like every possible thing that could go wrong, that may go wrong, is already taken care of. With the exception of the loan. And even with that, buyer has an out up until the day of closing.
Yeah, because if the buyer can't secure the loan, or lender's not gonna lend to the buyer, buyer's off the hook.
Or even if the buyer, even if the lending company, even if the buyer is qualified 100%, and the seller does not issue conditional loan of commitment, or they don't fund the loan in time, the buyer has an out.
Yeah.
And the seller has the right to cancel, like the day before closing.
Yep. Here's Joanne.
Before I read, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Only because I just got a phone call on this and I didn't know the answer. Do we have a way to search for accessible units?
EDUs?
No.
Oh, you mean handicap?
Yeah.
Normally like single family home, or
The condo.
you can call the listing agent.
Well, that's what I didn't know if there was, because I'm just glancing and if there was a,
So maybe under MLS, under other, that all those pull downs.
Yeah.
So you know what I used to call a lot is I would call MLS help desk. They are so good. You just ask them, hey, is there a way I can run a search for this, whatever it is, for X? And they'll provide you
I've
with some
seen it in
guidance.
Wording sometimes, rarely.
Yeah.
But never had anybody just.
No,
Yeah.
I think there is an AU.
Yeah,
No,
I
yeah, but yeah, I would ask them.
like, I
'Cause-
think there are
yeah.
units that are specifically built for handicap accessible,
Yeah, like hotels have that.
like hotels have that, right? But if I was a listing agent and my client has like grab bars or something, to me, that's not really, that's not ADA compliant.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm not gonna make that determination, right? So unless it's like specifically built for someone with 36-inch wide doors, I mean, which is 100% totally handicap accessible. As a listing agent, I don't think I would say it's accessible if it just has grab bars, or there's just like one.
True, but like, how do you help a buyer? Can't go through every single listing.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
That was not the answer that I wanted.
Yeah, no, I gave you an answer, call MLS. help
And I guess,
desk.
I guess it depends on, you know, their handicap, right? I mean, are they,
Well, wheelchair bound would probably be.
so that means that all the doorways have to be 36 inches, all the hallways have to be more than 36 inches, 36 inches, right? Can't have a tub, need a shower, right? So there's a lot of work, yeah, there's a lot that goes into that, but there may be some way to search it. But I guarantee like some of the old buildings in Waikiki or some of the old buildings anywhere are not gonna be that way.
Is there an ADA association in Hawaii?
Yeah, there is.
Maybe call them and ask them.
Yeah.
Is there a building that you guys like? Because it may boil down to just the infrastructure of the building is better here than there. And then they would need to then modify their own individual unit with grab bars or, you know, shower stall modification or whatever it is.
Okay. H3, correct, financing contingency. Buyer's obligation to purchase the property is contingent upon buyer obtaining the loan described in paragraph C2. A, if buyer does not obtain a conditional loan commitment letter or is unable to satisfy all conditions of the loan commitment letter within the time period specified in paragraphs H4, then buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph O2. Every time I see, oh no, there's the if buyer has met all conditions of the loan commitment letter, but lender fails to fund prior to closing, then buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph O3. C. Buyer may, 1, waive this financing contingency and purchase the property on all cash basis, or 2, increase the amount of cash funds in order to satisfy all of lender's requirements in funding the loan. If buyer elects either of the two options, buyer shall promptly provide written notice of such election to seller, together with evidence of buyer's ability to perform prior to expiration of the time period stated in paragraph H4.
So it's wide open, right, for buyer. If they can't get the loan, they don't have to buy. And no penalty to them.
Yeah,
So there's no loan contingency here.
In terms of,
So in California, there's a property contingency, so like, if with the property inspection, you can back out.
Yeah.
Like, there's a loan contingency that you set when you write the offer, which you only have this amount of time, but if the loan doesn't go through, the buyer is still losing that deposit.
not
yeah,
here.
it's not, they changed, well,
It used to be like that, but not anymore.
yeah.
And they're looking to change some of the verbiage in here because it's really buyer favored and doesn't allow the seller anything. And it really takes the response, you know, even like if the lender doesn't fund the loan. That's why it's important to work with
A good
a
lender.
good lender.
I've had a lender. I mean. Here we have unique situations, right? And so I think the local lenders, they're all aware of certain buildings and certain, you know, what they know what leasehold is, stuff like that. Mainland lenders may not be as aware and sensitive to those things, nor are they, I think, as attached. Because they're in whatever state servicing or trying to provide a loan here. So they're just not as attached. I've seen where we're the listing agent and literally 2 weeks prior to close, lender goes, sorry, we can't lend on this. Thank you very much, and he's out of there. Right? Just don't care. Some of them, not all of them. So we had to scramble and find another lender to lend on it. And it was, obviously the lender's fault. They didn't read whatever problem they found in the condo docs that prohibited or didn't allow them to lend on it.
Let's say with appraisal. There's,
It was in the condo docs, from what I understood.
I mean, if there's no appraisal, like the appraisal.
Oh, no, the appraisal was done. Appraisal was
but
done.
There's no, if the appraisal comes in different, there's no.
Oh, there is an appraisal clause. So, this is all subject to the lending side. It'll say, sales price or appraised value, whichever is lower. Right, so you'll borrow 80% based on either agreed upon price or appraised price, whichever is lower.
Yeah.
And if you can't qualify because appraisal is low, you don't have additional cash, you don't have to buy, you can
And
cancel.
Buyer can back out.
Buyer backs out, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Buyer can back out.
Yeah.
So as a listing agent, you're writing stuff in there that says buyer is willing to bring in X amount of cash more in the event of a low appraisal. If it was a competitive market, and if you wanted to make sure that you had a very good, strong offer for seller. Right? But if it's not a strong market, then no, you don't put any of that stuff in there. If the appraisal is low, it's low. Let's adjust the sales price if it's low. Yeah. Okay, your turn. You can read.
H4.
H4.
H4, buyer's obligations. Buyer is obligated to deliver to seller a pre-qualification letter which shall state that buyer is creditworthy based upon a credit report and is qualified for a mortgage loan by a date with or without review of income supporting documentation. Buyer is obligated to deliver to seller by B date a conditional loan commitment letter based upon underwriting approval and review of property appraisal, which shall state that the loan has been approved and lender will make the loan under specified conditions. No later than C days prior to closing, buyer shall deliver to seller written evidence that buyer has satisfied all conditions specified by lender except conditions which cannot be satisfied by buyer until closing. Buyer also authorized seller and seller's brokerage firm to contact buyer's lender regarding the status of buyer's mortgage loan.
Okay, so these are all just the timeframes that buyer is saying they'll be able to perform in order to get whatever loan that they're seeking. But pay attention to that last sentence, especially if you're a listing agent. It says right there, you have the authorization to contact the lender, the buyer's lender. A lot of listing agents, I don't think, contact lenders. They just hope that the lender is doing what they're supposed to do. But it says it right there. You have the authority as a listing agent to contact the lender. Ask them whatever you want. So even up front, I'll call the lenders and I'll ask them, I have a set list of questions that I'm going to ask the lender to help qualify whether or not that buyer, whether or not I can trust that lender has done his due diligence or her due diligence for that buyer. Things like, have you seen tax returns? Right? Have you pulled credit? Stuff like that. How long have you met with or been working with the buyer? Little evidence to assure seller that this guy can or can't qualify.
Shall I read F5?
Yeah, please.
H5, seller's right to cancel. Should buyer fail to satisfy any obligations under paragraph H2, H3, and or H4 within the specified time period, seller may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to paragraph 03.
All three, yep.
So I'm gonna suggest that we stop here.
Yeah, and then ask questions.
Because, yeah.
It's a big
because-
section, that's why.
Because seller's disclosures gets kind of big.
Sounds good to me.
So what are the timelines you put typically in for H4?
First off, I never write a contract with a 30-day closing. It's with 30-day closing. It's way too tight of a timeline, especially when you take a look at the conditions of the loan.
What
And
is
ho-
cash?
I'm sorry?
What if it's cash?
Well, if it's cash, then it's 30 days, but I'm talking about, in loans. Yeah. And then sometimes even 30 days on an all cash buy is too tight. Because there's no room for error. There's no room for mistakes. There's no room for a buyer to do a correct J1 inspection and have everything taken care of or do further investigation that he needs to do before making that decision. And so when I kind of cringe when I see contracts come in, for 30 days or less. I mean, I did one of my first deals, we did a 7-day closing. I mean, we did 7 days because the seller had to sell, he had to sell by the 31st of December. And my clients wrote it, they went to escrow, signed documents and gave a cashier's check. And closed in 7 days. Now, under those conditions, that's a little bit different, but normally I don't like to see 30 days. I like to see 45 days or less. I mean, 45 and I always hope to close, before that.
On the 30 or 45, I think your main concern is lending, right?
Yeah.
So there are some lenders who can perform well with 30. So if you go 35, if you choose to go 30, you make sure you talk to your lender. You don't just go, oh yeah, I think we'll close. Let's just be real strong and go 30 and not talk to the lender. That's suicidal. I've even talked to lenders where they'll, I'm asking them questions about the strength of the buyer. And I guess the agent representing the buyer didn't tell the lender much. So when I talked to the lender, and it happened to be, I think it was either Bank or First Hawaiian Bank. This is a long time ago. First question he asked me is it 45 days? And how long is the extension? Because he's already telegraphing to me he needs more than 45 days.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that's one of the big things that comes up for discussion when we're working on the new purchase contract for revisions, is that all the lenders, they take a look at, I got a 30-day closing, they move over to the extension period, and was it F2?
Yeah.
And say, oh, okay, if it doesn't, F3, if it doesn't close in 30 days, somebody has an extra 15 days, so we're just gonna figure on
We'll just take
45
it.
days already.
Yeah.
Right? But if you take a look at, if you got a 30-day closing and you're a seller and the buyer has not been able to complete any of the obligations in H3, those time, like the seller can cancel and they've got a backup offer. So they're chomping at the bit to go ahead and cancel. Like they can't wait for your buyer to miss a deadline. Cancellation notice. And then as far as like 03, I always put 3 days or less. Because 03 happens X amount of days after contingency.
Yep.
So why do you want to give the buyer or a seller like a whole week to cancel a contract and give you the opportunity to remedy it, especially in a competitive market? Like in today's market, it's not as competitive. So you can be a little bit more gracious with the timelines, but in a competitive market, you want a really, really tight timeline.
Mhm.
Because when the seller is forced to sell something because you messed up on a timeline, they could have got $10,000 or $20,000 more 2 weeks after they went to escrow. They're going to be really upset. And the same is on the other side. You mess up a timeline in a down market, and now the seller has to go back on the market. He's not even going to get $10,000 or $20,000. He's going to lose $10,000 or $20,000 after being on the market for an additional 2 weeks. You got a very unhappy seller. Sorry, was it? I know I got up in a rant, but
No,
this is question,
that's
this
good.
is question
Yeah,
period.
you guys have any other questions? Okay. Well, thanks for coming again. We'll see you guys next week. So, brown bag,
Thank
right?
you.
Yeah, bring your lunch.
Yeah, bring your
Feel free to
lunch.
eat. We'll get through it.